The lights dim. A quiet breath escapes through the crowd, and for a brief, trembling moment, the world seems to hold still. Somewhere behind that curtain, an old man waits. His hands shake not from fear, but from time, from battles that no one truly saw. And as he grips his cane, his rings catch the faint glow of the stage he once ruled. That man is Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, the wild heart of rock, the man who once screamed into the abyss and somehow came back with a smile. At 76, the noise has faded, but the echoes, they still live inside him. Once upon a time, he was chaos wrapped in leather, a young boy from Birmingham who dreamt of escape. His voice would cut through the silence of factory walls, his scream a rebellion against the life he was born into. He lived like a storm, reckless, loud, untamed. But behind the madness was a man who carried pain like an old friend. And now, as age bends his spine and illness slows his step, that wild storm stands in the calm looking back at what it all meant. The world remembers Ozzy as the man who bit the bat, shocked the stage, and scared the polite. But what they often forget is the boy who just wanted to be heard. The boy who cried himself to sleep in a damp room, wondering if life would ever change. The boy who became a legend and then a survivor. Today, Ozzy Osbourne walks through his twilight years not with regret, but with a strange kind of peace. Yet behind that quiet smile lies the haunting truth, a story of pain, forgiveness, and the heavy price of fame. What really happened to Ozzy at 76 is not just about illness or age. It's about what remains when the music stops, when the crowd fades, and when the only sound left is the beating of your own fragile heart. Childhood wounds and the first longing. Before the screams, the stadium lights, and the chaos of sold-out arenas, there was a boy. A small boy with wide, wondering eyes and a restless heart, born on a gray December morning in 1948, in the industrial heart of Birmingham, England. John Michael Osborne, later the world would know him as Ozzy, was born into a life already tinged with struggle. Birmingham was a city of soot, factories, and narrow streets where dreams often died before they could take shape. Ozzy's childhood home was modest, the air thick with the smell of coal and damp. He was the fourth of 7 children, a boy trying to find his voice among the noise of siblings, the weight of expectations, and the quiet resignation of working-class life. Even as a child, there was a spark, something uncontainable. He would belt out songs in the dark corners of his house, letting his voice echo through the hallways, startling his family, scaring the neighbors. Music became his first sanctuary. It was a place where he could escape the smallness of his world and glimpse the vastness of what life could be. But childhood, as it often is, was not gentle. Ozzy carried a quiet sadness, a sense that he did not quite belong. The first wound came not from strangers, but from the inexorable weight of loss. His father, Jack Osbourne, was a strict man, hardened by the harshness of the world and sometimes cruel in his expectations. Love in the Osbourne household was measured in discipline, not tenderness. Young Ozzy learned early that the world was heavy, that mistakes could echo longer than laughter. School offered no refuge. The boy who would one day command millions of screaming fans was clumsy, awkward, and often ridiculed. He remembers the sting of taunts, the sharp laughter that echoed through playgrounds, the small betrayals of childhood friendships. In the soft, quiet moments, he would feel the ache of isolation, a loneliness that would follow him like a shadow long into adulthood. Yet in these moments of pain, the seeds of rebellion were sown. The boy learned to find solace in imagination, in rhythm, in the simple act of making noise. Music became more than escape. It became identity. And even in the dimmest moments, when the weight of poverty, familial strain, and societal expectation pressed on him, there was a flicker of something else: defiance. A knowing that he was meant for more. One afternoon, perhaps when he was just 10, Ozzy recalls sneaking out of his house, following the distant hum of a guitar coming from a neighbor's window. He pressed his ear against the glass, feeling the vibrations seep into his bones. That moment, brief, quiet, and unnoticed, was transformative. It was a whisper from the universe. There was a world beyond the soot and the coal, and he would find his way there, even if it broke him in the process. The Osbourne family was far from perfect. Poverty clawed at every corner, and tragedy was never far away. He watched, helpless, as opportunities slipped past him, as neighbors fell ill, as the city demanded conformity and punished those who dared to dream differently. Each day was a lesson in endurance. Every slight, every small humiliation became a brick in the wall around his tender heart. But within those bricks, the fire of rebellion burned brighter. Music, friendship, and fleeting moments of joy became his companions. And even in the darkness, there was humor and irrepressible spark that would later become the hallmark of Ozzy's performances. He learned to laugh at life's cruelty, to twist pain into something strange and beautiful. The boy who cried in the night would one day scream in arenas, letting the world feel his torment and his triumph in the same breath. By the time he reached adolescence, the first emotional wounds had hardened into resilience. He had glimpsed both the fragility and the ferocity of life. He understood loss, humiliation, and longing lessons that would shape not only the man he would become, but the legend he was destined to be. In the shadows of Birmingham's gray streets, among soot and sorrow, the Prince of Darkness was quietly taking root. And so, the boy who felt too much and too deeply carried within him a gift and a curse, the ability to turn suffering into song, pain into performance, and heartbreak into anthems that would one day shake the world. The story of Ozzy Osbourne, the man, begins here in the echoing silence of a child's longing, in the first ache of a heart that refused to be small. Rejection, addiction, and inner turmoil. The stage lights weren't kind. When Black Sabbath formed in the late 1960s, the world barely knew what to make of their sound. Heavy, dark, unforgiving. The guitars thundered like storms, the drums pounded like heartbeats, and Ozzy's voice, his voice wasn't polished. It was jagged, raw, and almost painful to listen to. And yet, it carried something people couldn't resist, the echo of a soul scarred and unbroken. But the first taste of attention wasn't sweetness. It was chaos. Even as audiences cheered, the young singer felt an emptiness gnawing at him from within. Fame didn't fill the void, it exposed it. Behind the theatrics, the screams, and the makeup, Ozzy wrestled with demons that had been with him since childhood. Dyslexia, insecurity, fear of rejection, they whispered in his ear every night. Early recordings were rough. Producers doubted him. Record labels didn't understand his vision. Critics dismissed him as a novelty act, a wild boy trying too hard to shock. Every no, every insult, every sneer carved another notch into his fragile self-esteem. He began to drink. Not just casually, it became a companion, a shield against the world, and sometimes against himself. A bottle in hand, he could sing louder, feel bolder, forget the loneliness that gnawed at the edges of his mind. But alcohol, like all temporary saviors, came with a price. It sharpened the chaos inside him, unleashed reckless impulses, and drew the world's judgment even closer. Touring brought no peace. Nights blurred into endless hotel rooms, the roar of crowds followed by deafening silence in empty corridors. Loneliness clung to him like a second skin. Friends, bandmates, even family all tried to reach him, but Ozzy was slipping, a candle flickering in the wind, desperate to burn but unsure if he could survive the flame. The pressures weren't only internal. Black Sabbath became a lightning rod for controversy. Parents, Ministers and moral crusaders accused them of everything from Satanism to corrupting youth. Headlines screamed about the band's dark influence. Fans were loyal, yes, but every concert came with judgment waiting outside. And then came the personal tragedies, the moments that left invisible scars. He watched his friends stumble through the same vices that he had embraced. Sometimes they survived, sometimes they didn't. Every loss felt like a mirror of what could happen to him. But Ozzy, ever restless, could not stop. He had to sing, had to scream, had to let the music bleed out the pain. Each note carried pieces of the boy he had been, the prisoner he once was, the lonely soul who had learned to survive by turning sorrow into sound. It was during these years that the first whispers of his madness began. The world saw antics on stage, biting heads of bats, reckless behavior, and bizarre interviews. But behind the theatrics was vulnerability, a man desperate to be understood, desperate to belong, desperate to feel alive in a world that had often made him feel invisible. In private, the demons became louder. Ozzy began to struggle with addiction, a battle that would haunt him for decades. Drugs promised escape but delivered torment. Nights of ecstasy dissolved into mornings of regret. He often woke alone, haunted by fear, by guilt, by the question, am I enough? And yet, there was something unbreakable about him. Even at his lowest, even when the world doubted, he returned to the studio, to the stage, to the microphone. Because Ozzy understood a truth few could grasp. The pain wasn't just suffering. It was material raw, unrefined that could be transformed into something immortal. Every scream on a record, every agonized lyric, every haunting melody was an exorcism of sorts. He was laying himself bare, showing the world the wounded child still inside, and somehow, people listened. Somehow, the scars became a bridge between him and the audience. Yet, the struggle continued. Fame brought wealth, yes, but not peace. The boy from Birmingham still felt small, still feared rejection, still wondered if he would ever belong. Every victory felt tinged with fear. Every applause echoed with a shadow of doubt. The tragedy of this phase wasn't the mistakes, it was that he could feel deeply, and the world often only saw the chaos. And so, Ozzy Osbourne became a man of contradictions. Adored yet misunderstood, powerful yet fragile, feared yet achingly human. It was in this crucible, forged in loss, addiction, and relentless judgment, that the seeds of transformation were planted. The boy who had faced prison, the man who had faced rejection, and the artist who had faced endless criticism, all were being prepared for the moment the world would finally understand him. And that moment was coming, though neither he nor anyone else could have predicted its scale. From darkness to icon. The story of Ozzy Osbourne is not just a tale of chaos. It is a story of survival, of a boy who ran from pain, a man who was consumed by it, and yet somehow always found a way to rise. After the darkness of his Black Sabbath departure, after the night swallowed by despair, life whispered to him gently, insistently, that he was not yet finished. It began quietly, in the small corners of his life where love waited patiently. Sharon Arden, the woman who had refused to abandon him, became more than a manager. She became a mirror for his soul. Through her, Ozzy glimpsed a reflection he hadn't seen in years, a man worth fighting for. The marriage that followed was not perfect, far from it. There were struggles, near tragedies, brushes with death that could have ended everything. Yet through each storm, they endured. Sharon's unwavering presence became the anchor for a man adrift. And then came fatherhood, an unexpected tender force in the life of a man known for chaos. Kelly, Jack, and later Amy were not just children. They were lifelines. Ozzy would often say, with a quiet humility rare for someone of his legend, that he didn't deserve them. But in their laughter, their small victories, he found meaning. The The chaos of his past began to make sense not as a curse, but as the fire that forged him. Musically, Ozzy's rebirth was undeniable. Blizzard of Oz wasn't just a solo album. It was a declaration, a proclamation that the man who had been broken could still roar. Crazy Train became more than a song. It became a symbol of survival, of persistence, of refusing to bow to the darkness within. Yet it wasn't fame or fortune that healed him. It was the quiet moments reading to his children, sitting in a garden, feeling the sun on his face. It was the discipline of facing his demons, one day at a time. Each rehab stint, each therapy session, was not just a fight against addiction. It was a reclaiming of self. Faith, too, played its subtle part. Ozzy was never overtly religious, but he often spoke of gratitude in small, reverent ways for the second chances, for the love that refused to leave him, for the music that still flowed through him like a river. There is something sacred about surviving your own darkness, about waking each day and choosing life when death whispers in your ear. By the 1980s and 1990s, Ozzy had not only returned, he had also evolved. His music became sharper, yet still haunted. His persona remained wild, yet it carried an undertone of wisdom. The world saw a rock god, a madman, a spectacle, but those closest to him saw a man tempered by loss, softened by love, and strengthened by survival. Even in public struggles, the infamous reality shows, the hospitalizations, the stumbles, Ozzy's resilience shone. He became a figure of imperfection and triumph intertwined. He showed the world that it is possible to fall, even spectacularly, and rise again with dignity. Perhaps the greatest testament to his transformation was not a record, not a tour, not a stage. It was the quiet, ordinary victories. A family held together through chaos. A legacy reshaped from pain into inspiration. A man who could look at his reflection and finally recognize the soul staring back. Ozzy's story in this phase becomes almost poetic, a dance between shadow and light. For every scream in a song, there is a whispered prayer of thanks. For every reckless act, there is a moment of tenderness, of reflection, of realization. And through it all, he remained Ozzy Osbourne, irrepressible, flawed, human, and yet undeniably alive. Transformation, he learned, was not about escaping the darkness. It was about walking through it, carrying scars as proof of survival, and emerging, if not unbroken, then unbowed. It was about music, yes, but more than that. It was about love, family, and the quiet courage to keep going when the world expects you to fall. And so, the man who had once been a haunted boy from Birmingham became a legend not just for his voice or his stage antics, but for the life he had fought to reclaim. Oh, now, at 76, Ozzy moves through life with a quiet fragility that would have seemed impossible decades ago. The body that once conquered stages now trembles under the weight of illness, Parkinson's, fractures, and years of abuse taking their toll. Yet in his eyes, the spark remains, a spark that refuses to dim even when the music fades and the applause grows distant. Now, at 76, Ozzy moves through life with a quiet fragility that would have seemed impossible decades ago. The body that once conquered stages now trembles under the weight of illness, Parkinson's, fractures, and years of abuse taking their toll. Yet in his eyes, the spark remains. A spark that refuses to dim even when the music fades and the applause grows distant. He spends long hours reflecting, sometimes in silence, sometimes in laughter with Sharon by his side. Memories flood back the victories, the losses, the friends lost along the way. There is sorrow, yes, but also gratitude, a recognition that he survived what so many others could not. Mortality is no longer an abstract concept for him. It is a constant companion. But he faces it not with fear, but with acceptance. Ozzy understands that life, in all its chaos, pain, and joy, is fleeting, and that every note he sang, every scream he let out on stage, every laugh shared with his children has left a mark that will outlive him. The world sees him now not just as a rock legend, but as a survivor. A man who turned his demons into music, his pain into art, and his failures into stories that resonate across generations. His legacy is raw, real, and human. And though age has slowed his steps, it has not diminished the echo of his voice, the intensity of his spirit, or the love of millions who grew up with him. Ozzy Osbourne, at 76, is a reminder that even in the final chapters, there can be dignity, reflection, and a quietly enduring light. A life lived fully, recklessly, painfully, and yet beautifully.